Welcome. Let's begin the presentation today.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Rick for organizing everything technically. So this webinar is called Biopharmaceutical Section offers advice on strategic planning for ASA Fellow nomination. I'll introduce speakers in a moment. So I just want to start maybe from the brief history of this project. As my name is Ilya Lipkovich, and I am a chair of Biopharmaceutical Section Fellows Committee, which should not be confused with ASA Committee on Fellows. And so as I started my role here, the first assignment that I had helped Alex Dmitrienko, my friend and former colleague, and former chair of Biopharmaceutical Section Fellows Committee, to organize a paper which collected thoughts and reflections of several people, a diverse group of people, including both former present ASA Committee on Fellows and new fellows, frequent nominators, so their thoughts on the process. And it was published first in Biopharmaceutical Report, but then Amstrad News republished it as it found it useful, not only for members of Biopharmaceutical Section, but more broadly. And Biopharmaceutical Section indeed is quite famous for the number of ASA fellows elected, and this graph shows the process that the steady increase from 1967 to 2020. And this year we had 13 people who were nominated and actually elected. Now this shows, the green line shows as before the number of elected fellows from Biopharmaceutical Section, and the gray line shows the overall data on ASA fellows. And so we see that we are tracking pretty well the progress, and the ratio is shown as yellow line, which reached the mark, the record mark of about 23.5% in this year. So not surprisingly, I don't attribute fully the success of Biopharmaceutical Section to distinguished individuals who advise us on that. However, not the least, our distinguished speakers had many years of nominating successfully candidates, and now today I present them in the order they would appear. Now, Ivan Zhang is VP and Head of Statistical Sciences in AbbVie. He became ASA Fellow 2011, and the same year he became Fellow of Society of Clinical Trials. He is actually a current member of ASA Fellows Committee. Paul Gallo was in pharma industry since 1981. He was a senior biometrical fellow in the Novartis Statistical Methodology Group. He became ASA Fellow in 2014, and he was on ASA Fellow Committee from 2016 to 2018. I was chair in 2018. Christy Chuang-Stein retired as Vice President and Head of Statistical Research and Consulting Center at Pfizer after 30 years in the pharma industry. She became ASA Fellow in 1998, and she was in ASA Fellow Committee from 2008 to 2010. Steve Ruberg, last but not least, been in the pharma industry since 1981, technical and administrative leadership roles in various companies, including Eli Lilly, where actually we met and we're closely working together. ASA Fellow from 1994, and he was on ASA Fellow Committee from 2012 to 2014. So all these people, of course, are distinguished in that most of the career was in pharma industry. Well, however, this webinar is not limited to people from pharma, as we hope and truly believe that the advice you will receive from these people would be applicable to across the board and would be useful for many other people. A technical note is, if you leave questions, please don't use chat, but use Q&A button. Then we'll look at your questions after presentation, and also we'll have panel session with additional panelists that will be introduced at that time. So with this, I will pass it to Ivan Chen, and I will be advancing slides.
Thank you very much, Ilya, for organizing the event, for inviting me to participate in this session. And as you mentioned, I actually just came off the committee as of a couple months ago. My terms from 2018 to 2020. And so it's always a 3-year term. But I'm happy to share some of the insights that I learned while serving on the committee, but also have been sort of helping some of the nominations myself. Next slide, please. So as many of you know, the ASA's fellow nomination process has evolved over the years. And there's a lot of details that's presented at the ASA website if you're interested in sort of getting some sense of what the nomination process will be involved and what are the sort of traits that the committees are looking for. But here I wanted to go over in general, just very briefly give you some insights that I learned about the 6 different categories that is listed here. And I will try to go into each of the categories to provide some of my personal experiences and how those things are being taken and reviewed by the committee as a whole. Next slide, please. The first category, and this is by far probably applies a lot to the statisticians working in industry, because we do a lot of the like consultations, we do a lot of applications. So this section that really talks about the effectiveness and the results and whether there's any process improvement of the statistical methods that a statistician have contributed to in terms of computing, data collection, and consultations. And what I wanted to share with you is that a lot of the packages that I review over the last few years, the really good ones really did provide the insight about the contribution. It's not just mainly mention what they do, but is what are the insight the contribution have provided to add to the business value. And also what's the impact of the contribution. And I know we all work in a pharmaceutical industry. Personally, there are many examples where the application of innovative methods, it may not be the one that you really develop, but it may be a really good method that can be customized to a certain examples. And in that, it really delivers some of these really great values in terms of maybe making decisions, right? Or doing the biomarker development, or maybe clinical trial methodologies that help accelerate the development program of a certain drugs or vaccines. And the ultimate impact, whether it comes from the business decision or whether it's the actual impact on a drug approval. And I think those are huge sort of impact from the statistical contributions that we can really think of. And so those are just some of the insights that I wanted to provide. And if you can write a really good story about what the challenges you're facing and then how you face those challenges and achieve the results, I think they really connect to the people who are reviewing the package. And remember, on the committee, not many people are really familiar with what we do in the industry and what the contribution of statisticians bring to the table. So having a storytelling to a non-statistician's audience actually could really help polish the package of nomination. Next slide, please. The second category really talks about administration of statistical activities. And really, this category is suitable for people who may be more in a management of a statistical organization and in the leadership, and how you create that kind of environment that champions the statistical applications and also to promote the career growth of a statistician within the organization. I think there's in terms of scientific excellence, innovation, or influence of statisticians, so that kind of environment, fostering the environment really counts for this administration of statistical activities. Next slide, please. the third category really talks about teaching and dissemination of statistical knowledge. And really, I know if you work in the academic way, part of your job is teaching, but this is not what it's about. This is actually about above and beyond what your normal call of duty is. For folks like us working in the industry, this may talk about mentoring and coaching, or you're giving out short courses at the ASA meetings or the biopharm, the regulatory workshops. So those kind of sort of accomplishments and outreach activities, that how you excel in those areas, and that really trying to promote the statistical applications in non-statistical journals, for example, is also another area that we can talk about in this area. Next slide, please. Statistical research. So this is really, again, by the name, is really innovative statistical research. But really the important thing is to highlight what's the significance and the impact of the research. Having a long list of publication obviously is good, but it's not sufficient justification. We need to have a coherent, a good story around the research that we are doing, and how it ties into whether it's the scientific breakthrough or whether it's the application of the research to solve some real world problems that really brings the impact together. Next slide, please. This category is the service to ASA. I know there have been discussions over the years about how important is this service to the ASA. I can tell you that the ASA Board of Directors actually have several rounds of discussion in recent years, and this has been highlighted as one of the really critical components of the ASA nomination package. After all, the fellow is given from the ASA, so having an outstanding leadership and service provided to the society really counts towards the sort of overall influence within the statistical community. So for example, you're elected to a national office and maybe board of directors, or the co-chairing of ASA sponsor meetings, like the regulatory industry workshops, and or biopharm session. Those are really national, at the national level leadership opportunities. And even if it's just local chapters and committees, we could also include what are the responsibilities, what are the impact those responsibilities brings to the ASA community. Or if you're serving on an ASA journals editorial board, like the Statistics in Biopharmaceutical Research or JASA, or some other related journals that ASA is sponsoring, I think those count towards the service as well. Next slide, please. So, and again, the last category is really just a general service to the statistical profession. And I know many of us also participate in other societies, for example, maybe the International Bayesian Society or the International Biopharmaceutical Society of Statistics, those kind of, or Biometric Society, for example. And there's lots of things that we could demonstrate that the overall profile of the nominations really excel in those kind of service to the profession in general. But remember, these are 6 different categories that one can talk about. You may not need to have really outstanding contribution in all those categories, but I think if in general, what I've seen is probably you talk about 2 or 3 and really highlight those contributions. And of course, the ASA service is one of the things you have to talk about it. And besides all the other things that you might have, you know. So next slide, please. So this is sort of my final slides in terms of the nomination and letter of recommendation preparation. And I know the speakers, Paul, Steve, and Christy, are going to talk a lot more, so I won't go into in detail. I just want to highlight that there's more the details provided in the ASA website. And remember, the submission really is between now, in the next couple of weeks, the submission link will be open. and it runs through the end of February or March 1st. So with that, maybe I'll just stop here and pass the ball to Ilya.
Thank you. So with this, we will move to our next speaker.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. So thanks, Ivan. Thanks, Ilya, for driving this whole activity, and to Rick for the background support. I'll speak from the perspective of how the committee goes about this task and what a committee member might be looking for, in case that helps advise how to make the best case for a candidate. Putting together a good package is a close collaboration between the candidate and the nominator. It's in the nominator's name, but it's really a shared task, so I'll be speaking as if the nominator is the responsible party. But those of you who will at some point be nominated, this involves you as well. And I'm describing things from my experiences during my 3 years on the committee and the people that I worked with on the committee, but my guess is that things were pretty similar in other years, but you'll hear in this webinar from members who span a pretty wide time frame. Next slide. So this committee is a bit unique among ASA committees in the sense that most of its activity is very intense, very concentrated in time, essentially during March, and very heavy in March certainly, and a bit into April. There have been over 100 nominations in all the years that I'm aware of, and I heard that in one recent year there were more than 140. So we get to know the candidates very well on paper, at least. Right? We cram a lot of facts into our heads. Right? We know how important this is to people, and we want to get it right. It's short-term memory, of course. A couple of months later, we'll have forgotten those details. Something to keep in mind is that the majority of candidates seem comparably qualified overall, and this is natural because people tend to be nominated when they're at a point of their careers when they have a record that first makes them viable, right? A few years later, many of these people will look like no-brainer choices. Of course, they're fellows, but maybe that wasn't necessarily the case when their case first came up. And if I can oversimplify a little, maybe there's a small tail, right, of the nominees we look at where we look and say, wow, this person's got a clear case. Why weren't they nominated sooner? And in the other tail, we may see some people where, maybe they're great at what they do and they're, wonderful people, but at this point, they just don't have the record of achievement and impact of the other candidates. And then there's this very large middle group where everybody's viable, and the committee agonizes over those. And it's challenging because everybody's got a different mix of roles and skills and achievements. So as we look at this group, it's apples and oranges and all sorts of other fruits. So the reason I'm mentioning this is obviously it's important to make your case as clearly and convincingly as possible and convey to the committee clearly why you believe your candidate is deserving. Next. So the committee has 9 members, three new members each year. You can see who they are on the ASA website. They span different employment sectors. In my time on the committee, and I'm sure it's true more broadly, I thought we had really good people as members and working cooperatively to help each other understand the accomplishments of candidates whose experiences or activities might have been different from our own. Nobody was pushing people they knew or people in certain organizations or certain kinds of work. There were no factions advocating for certain people. That was a nice aspect of the experience. And normally after this month of initial review, there's a face-to-face meeting at ASA headquarters. I'm guessing that was not the case this year, and I confirm. And at that meeting, the committee discusses people individually at length, especially the ones that they feel that discussion is important, to try to have the clearest picture of that candidate. I'll mention here just a myth I've heard once or twice that maybe I'll dispel. And I've heard people say that, well, I've heard that people generally don't get fellowship on the first try. And for those who remember and know what I'm talking about, this is how the Baseball Hall of Fame used to be. You know, like Joe DiMaggio can't get into the Hall of Fame because nobody should get into the Hall of Fame the first time. That's absolutely not the case. This is a memoryless process. So while some continuing committee members may or may not remember candidates from the previous year, there's absolutely no formal linkage. There's nothing that would tell the committee who had been nominated before or how many times to any advantage or disadvantage. The committee just looks at what's in front of them. And maybe it's a natural tendency that this arose because maybe people naturally add to their record of achievement and they're more viable candidates a year or two later. Next slide. So Ivan nicely summarized these categories already. So this is the supporting statements section, and I think we can jump to the next slide already, given what Ivan's already told us. So this section 9, well, and actually also to reinforce something that that Ivan said. Usually, most candidates, their cases will hinge on their couple of most important categories. Very few will have outstanding achievements in all of them. So usually cases will hinge on the nominee's strongest or 2 or 3 areas. It's not all categories need to be filled out, and leaving a few blank is not uncommon, and that happens in different ways. You know, sometimes people group the consultation categories A and B into a single response because they have overlap and some similarity. The website instructions say that section 9 has a 4-page limit. In my experience, there's a little softness in that. The committee members don't ignore what's on page 5 or 6 if it gets that far. If a package goes way beyond that, it's probably not really helping, and it might even have the effect of making some of the nominees' most important contributions get a bit lost. We saw one that was around 20 pages long. Occasionally, I get the feeling that some nominators think that will be bowled over by the weight of the package, and if it has more weight, it'll carry more weight. That's not the case. I think a good case can be made fairly crisply and concisely, and may come across most clearly that way. So certainly, you don't want to put the entire resume with all the details into the supporting statements. That's not what that section is there for, and it could actually work against the candidates, to the candidate's disadvantage if it obscures a bit what's really their most important qualifications. Next slide. Some of the packages have supporting statements with a bit of a dry tone, almost like a job description, a list of responsibilities that the nominee has in their position. You know, so very many, huge number of ASA members have positions that their skills and experiences led them to, and are no doubt very good, you know, in their role. But listing those background details that qualify them for the role, or the typical tasks that they perform in those roles, may not distinguish them from many others who hold similar positions. So if you know, if I use my own field as an example, I might be thinking that, okay, well, you know, that's what a pharmaceutical industry statistics project lead does. That's what a statistics group head does. And, you know, I expect people have the skills and background to qualify them for their position. So as I look at the package, I might say, well, that's fine. It sounds pretty standard. I'm in a large company and we've got a dozen people like that. And the same goes for, I'm sure, for the companies of today's other panelists. But the question for the committee is now what's going to distinguish the impact and achievements of that candidate from others who might have who are in similar roles. So what, you know, whatever that means in your particular case, right? You should be trying to emphasize what makes your candidate particularly outstanding and impactful, and, you know, maybe don't take up too much valuable space in Section 9 with what might be considered, you know, the mundane or routine details. Some of those can be in the CV if we want to see them. Next slide. And I'll just mention that, you know, there's the nomination packages we see often include many of these vaguely described attributes and platitudes, things like this. You know, oh, this person explains ideas clearly, they motivate their staff, they get to the heart of the matter. Now, and sometimes without the supporting details, and this may all be true and relevant to their case, and it's okay to mention them, but you should keep in mind that in a setting like this, all packages will champion their candidate and will include such phrases, and this doesn't necessarily help the committee distinguish. So we're certainly not seeing packages where, you know, the nominator writes and say, well, this person is very bright, but he doesn't really explain things that clearly. So again, you should try to provide the details that make this clear, whatever that means in your context. You know, testimonials with some specifics. Has the nominee won teaching awards? Can you make the case that the nominee was responsible for implementation of a novel design or cutting edge analytic approach that turned out to be really impactful? So the more you can support general attributes like this with specific details, the better. Next slide. Yeah, so the service, Ivan already described this nicely. I was invited to an ASA board meeting during the season when I was about to be chair. And this was a main topic that was discussed. And the board was pretty clear, no matter how outstanding in some particular aspect somebody might be. So for illustration, let's say technical research, the message I was getting is that, well, what the honor we're giving here, this is fellowship in our society, and we expect fellows to have given some type of service to our society. And then the question is, well, okay, what does that mean and how much? And Ivan mentioned some of the standard examples, chapter or section office, meaningful editorial service, conference organization, ASA committees, maybe substantial involvement across a number of years at JSM. And then the next level of the question then is that, well, what about service to the statistical field that's not directly ASA related, right? Maybe this involves non-ASA journal editorial positions, or for international members, service to statistical societies in other countries. And it's absolutely relevant. It's hard to really translate this into an algorithm. If we use something like editorial service as an example, we certainly wouldn't want to overlook important editorial positions in major journals, right? It can be very meaningful that someone's been on an editorial board for Biometrics or Biometrica, but The nomination package is sort of telling a story about the candidate. So if somebody has important editorial service across different journals that might include both ASA and non-ASA related, that would likely be interpreted as very meaningful. Maybe similarly for important conference organization activities, could be a mix of ASA related and non-ASA related. And I'll just mention here that a number of the packages will sometimes mention for service and say, well, the nominee has reviewed several statistical papers. I would just mention that's not irrelevant, but on its own usually doesn't make the service case in the absence of other bigger ticket items. That's sort of background information that very many ASA members, of course, will have. And on its own, you know, again, just reviewing several papers probably really doesn't check the service box in a way that might be likely to be meaningful to the committee. Next slide. The letters from prominent individuals in our field can be expected to carry weight, right? It's meaningful to us on the committee that a very accomplished expert supports the nomination of this candidate. But if a letter just restates facts that are clearly presented elsewhere in the package, this might not help that much. The letters that I found most effective conveyed some inside story from somebody in position to know that might convey more than just the high level facts. So for you know, a chapter officer, it's not just that the nominee held the office, but maybe another officer can describe how it was that person's idea to undertake some new chapter activity or new initiative that was very meaningful, and that the nominee invested a lot of effort in making that happen. Or industry working groups, for example, a lot of them have a lot of members, but very often there's a few key drivers that play a strong role in coming up with the ideas and promoting them. So if that's the case for your nominee, might be very helpful to have, you know, the leader of the working group or somebody who interacted with it closely describe exactly how the candidate was a major player there. Or let's say that for technical statistical development, and certainly not all members of the committee will be technical experts in all the areas that the nominees can span. But maybe in a letter, a recognized technical expert in a certain area might explain the importance of the results that a nominee produced and how this influenced further technical development in that area. So to the extent that the letters provide a fuller picture of the nominee's actual impact, I think that's when they can be most helpful. Next slide. And we might even want to rethink a little bit a candidate's resume and how it's organized. CVs, of course, sensibly contain a lot of the details that I suggested don't belong in the supporting statements. So as a committee member, I might be interested to take a closer look at details of a nominee's publication record or conference participation, or for an academic, some details on students and dissertations they've supervised. A lot of CVs probably were initially prepared for a job search and might mention details like, you know, what programming languages somebody knows or office tools, right? But you know, you're not going to become a fellow because you know how to use Excel, for example. And this is probably not a real high priority to think about, but I would suggest to give a little thought to maybe slightly reorganizing a CV to make it more readily convey what you think might be most important for your candidate, whatever that means in your particular case. We've seen some resumes that are as short as around a half dozen pages that are very effective. That's not, that's not a goal to be that short, and they can certainly be several times larger than that. Maybe not 80 pages long though, and we've seen some of those also, and that can make it more challenging for a committee member to discern what's really important about your candidate's case. And I think things come to mind for me, like I remember one that was really large, and there was in their listing of publications, there was a publication that had, I think, about 145 authors, about a 5 or 6 page paper, and every one of them was listed, and that just contributed to why this was a very large package when it was printed out. And I think et al. Would have been fine there. But okay, next slide. So yeah, just to wrap up again, for the prospective and future fellows, and I fully expect some of you are listening to this webinar. Good luck, and I guess next back to Ilya to turn over to Christy.
Now, thank you very much, Paul. And now we will move to our next speaker, Christy Chuang-Stein.
Thank you very much, Ilya. I also want to thank Ilya for organizing this webinar and inviting me to participate in it today. I will next share my thoughts on the joys and the role of a nominator. In my career, I've been fortunate to have supervisors who looked after my professional development. The word mentor was not used much in industry 30 years ago. I relied heavily on my supervisors for guidances. They guided me not only on drug development projects, but also in a capacity that we would call mentoring, coaching today. I respected them and consciously modeled my behaviors after them. One thing I learned from them early on is this. Next slide, please. If you make to the top, remember to extend a helping hand so that others may get to the top too. I never thought of becoming an ASA fellow. One day out of the blue, my immediate supervisor told me that it was time to nominate me for this honor. I was extremely surprised then. I'm still very grateful to his generous offer today. Some awards allow self-nomination, but not the fellow award, at least not yet. To become an ASA fellow, an individual needs a nominator. Next slide, please. How does one become a nominator? Or how do you become a nominator? You can reach out and volunteer to nominate a worthy fellow statistician, or you may be approached by a fellow statistician who is hoping to become an ASA fellow. Should you decide to become a nominator in either scenario, it is beneficial to share with the nominee early on your knowledge of the nomination and selection process. It is also important to be frank in assessing the probability of success with the nominee upfront. A new nominator might not have much experience in assessing the probability of success. Nevertheless, over time with experience, the assessment will have more precision. The next slide, please. A critical decision is when to nominate. Should the nomination occur during the upcoming cycle because the candidate has already had a compelling record? Or should we wait for a while and nominate in a future cycle with a mapped out timeline? In the second case, the candidate might be a rising star on their way to success, but needs a little more time to further strengthen their records. I often compare our professional journey to running a distance race or climbing a mountain. Our candidate may need to cover a few more miles or gain a little more vertical distance in going up the slope. I have found it more important to submit a credible candidate with a good fighting chance for success than taking the attitude of just submitting it and see what will happen. Ivan and Paul have shared many useful insights. I will focus on 4 tips in my talk from the perspective of a nominator. Many of my recommendations are already covered by Ivan and Paul. The repetitions serve to reinforce the comments by them. Next slide. My first tip is to start early. Early is good. It allows more time for thorough planning and iterations. Since each person can be involved in at most 2 fellow nominations, either as a nominator or writing a recommendation letter. Starting early means that you are more likely to get the supporters of your first choice. Some statisticians are much sought after and tend to max out on the limit early. Inviting somebody early to support a nomination also shows respect to the individuals, because you are giving them plenty of time to prepare the letter and make it possible for them to adjust the contents if necessary. Starting early also provides a good insurance against unexpected events. A supporter of the nomination may be called away for an extended period or suddenly had to go to some place for a long period of time. Starting early may minimize the impact of such unexpected occurrences, so you want to start early. Next slide. As a nominator, we need to treat each nomination seriously, giving it the attention and energy it deserves. A nominator needs to work with the nominee to decide early on areas of strengths to focus on and the list of important publications to cite. The impact of the publications will be part of the supporting statement discussion, as we heard earlier. It's all about impact, influence, and what the nominee has done to the profession for the society. Discussion needs to be made on who will write the supporting letters and which letter should cover what areas of strength. I have found that divide and conquer is a good strategy to split up the areas for different letter writers to concentrate and elaborate. As a nominator, it is important to offer clear suggestions on the core contents of the letters to each writer and provide clear communication on the timeline. Encourage the letter writers to share personal stories on their interactions with the candidate. I think Ivan alluded to the personal stories. After the committee has read hundreds of nomination packages, some personal touch, personal stories will make a particular package more interesting than others. Equally important is to touch base with the nominee regularly and follow up with the letter writers as the deadline approaches. Next slide, please. One cannot underestimate the importance of documented service to ASA and the statistical profession. Documented service to the ASA and the profession is a necessary condition to be elected ASA Fellow, even though it's not a sufficient one. We have heard about examples of services to the ASA. They could be the journal involvement, they could be the local chapter leadership role, they could be committee leadership role, they could be sponsoring some important activities kind of organized by sections, playing a leadership role in the ASA flagship conference like GSM, or the Biopharm section's regulatory industry workshop. One additional item would be some ASA president's initiative. Every year, the president would have some presidential initiatives. If one has a leadership role in those initiatives that resulted in policy implementation at ASA, those would be good examples of services to the ASA as well. This is one area that many statisticians did not think about or plan early in their career. If a nominee has limited records in this area, it may be better to set aside a couple of years to strengthen the records. A nominator may be in a position to advise a nominee on how to achieve the additional records and help make the needed connections to effectuate the contributions. Next slide, please. Putting together a nomination package is like putting together a sports team. The nominator is the coach doubled as the manager, and the nominee is really the owner. Working together, the coach and the owner needs to decide and to optimize on the selection and the workout routine of a team to achieve an optimal outcome. Optimization includes how best to utilize the contents of the supporting letters and the cited publications, how to clearly highlight the unique contributions of the nominee, whether to solicit additional success stories from the individuals who did not write letters, and finally, it will be worthwhile to consider whether the nominee has a trusted friend who is willing to review a nearly final draft and provide critical feedback. I got into the game of bridge after retirement. It's a source of joy and also a source of frustration. I have developed a habit of drawing analogies between the game and the many life events. Preparing a nomination package is like playing a bridge hand. The nominator and the nominee needs to work closely as a pair to find the optimal contract and score as many tricks as possible with the deal in hand. Likewise, for a fellow nomination, it is imperative to prepare the best nomination package possible with available materials. The next slide. Based on my own experience, being a nominator is one of the most consequential mentoring roles one can play for a friend. While the period of involvement may be short, the interactions could be intense. Professionally, it's rewarding to help a fellow statistician become an ASA Fellow. I would like to end my talk by encouraging all who are in a position to be a nominator to become a nominator and embrace this role with energy and enthusiasm. Thank you. Back to you, Ilya.
Thank you, Christy, very much. And now we'll get to our last speaker, Steve Ruberg, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ilya, and to the Biopharm section and ASA for an opportunity to participate in this webinar. And thanks to the previous speakers, as Christy mentioned, going last, I'm going to have some similar comments, but I'm also going to have some different perspectives as well, so you can blend all of these perspectives together in complementary and mutually reinforcing ways. Next slide. So I've always come at this from a strategic planning kind of approach, and I think you've heard elements of this from the other speakers. So if you only remember or keep one slide, at least for me, keep this one. Right? Here's the 5-step plan that I've always worked through. I've lost track of how many ASA fellows I've nominated. It's into double digits for sure, and have had quite a bit of success following this strategic plan and working collaboratively, as other speakers have said, with the nominee to make the best package possible. So I'll go through each of these steps. The candidate must be deserving, define the candidate's strengths, how to map those, identify ASA fellows for writing letters, inviting multiple letter writers, and how you can do that in a way that helps them write the best letter possible. And then identifying topics for supporting statements, talk a little bit about more on less. Next slide. So let's take step one. First, you have to be committed to the notion that the candidate is deserving. Okay, there are times when I've been asked to be a nominator for a person, for ASA Fellow, and I've had to honestly say, I'm sorry, I don't know you well enough, or I don't know enough of your accomplishments to make me feel comfortable that I'm willing to stand behind you as an ASA Fellow nominee. So, so I look for things, this excellence in multiple areas of the profession and the job. Sustained performance or area under the curve is a phrase that's come up when I was on the committee quite a bit. It's not only what you accomplish, but how much you accomplish, and kind of this sustained performance over, how long have you been making contributions, okay? So one good year or a bunch of publications in a short period of time doesn't necessarily mean you're an ASA Fellow, but look for that broad and sustained performance. Some don'ts. Christy mentioned this. I don't think it's a good thing to just, let's give it a try and see what happens. Don't submit year after year. I was on the committee for 3 years, and I remember seeing an inadequate submission in 3 consecutive years for the same person. So I think that just wastes a lot of time and energy and effort. I say don't annoy the committee with scant or incomplete nominations or a sloppy organization or arrangement of your nomination. And also, one of the things I found annoying at times is sometimes there was some arrogance from nominators or letter writers, the notion of, gee, this is so obvious, why can't everybody just see this person should be an ASA Fellow, without really giving the committee, who does not know the individual or does not know perhaps their area of expertise or business or teaching or whatnot. So you got to work from the notion that committee is a diverse group of people and they don't know most of the nominees that are coming in. And also you don't want to do this on a kind of, let's just give it a try, because failure can be discouraging to the candidate and may eliminate their enthusiasm for future nominations. All right, step 2, next slide. Define the candidate's strengths. You've heard these words before, but I've used them quite a bit. Influence and impact, right? On the job front, how influential have you been within your company? If you're working in a pharma company or biotech company or whatever, what initiative have you taken? How have you been driving improvements or driving innovation, working beyond the boundaries of your statistics function? And documented recognition at the institution. And one of those things that I looked for was quite often, were people promoted, or how rapidly were they promoted? Of course, people who got promotions within the industry on a regular or consistent basis certainly indicated to me that their company recognized their value of their contributions, okay? And it can't just be doing their job year in and year out. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of pharmaceutical statisticians who go to work every day and make contributions to a clinical trial development program or a research and development area or an NDA submission. But unless they've done something that's really outside the boundaries of that expected work, you have to make sure that they're pushing those boundaries and driving improvements, innovation, initiative, et cetera. On a professional level, next click, extending the boundaries of statistical science, and you've heard about involvement in ASA, so I won't belabor those points. Next bullet, please. It's about breadth. I also looked at people who had breadth across therapeutic areas in the pharmaceutical industry, across development phases, across business areas. I always thought it was great that an industry person had some connection to a university for showing that they were teaching and disseminating statistical knowledge and showing cross-functional or cross-institutional collaboration. That shows to me initiative, et cetera. And if you're an academic person in the biopharm section, then some connection to industry or government applications that just showing up at your university and teaching your classes. And I'd see people who would say, well, I've had 7 PhD students. Well, I don't know, I guess I expect a professor at a major university to have PhD students. So what was exceptional about that? You have to you have to show something that's beyond just those boundaries of doing your everyday job. Some connection to consulting or industry and government applications, I think, is good. And if you don't have this breadth, if the person doesn't have that kind of breadth, then I think they have to have very, very deep expertise in one area. So perhaps someone is very deep in oncology, very widely recognized or even world-renowned expert in certain areas of oncology, clinical development or research or whatnot. But it's either got to be this breadth is what I look for primarily, but if not breadth, then somebody who is very deep in maybe one particular arena. Next slide, please. Step 3, identifying letter writers. I think it's very important to have ASA fellows. That's usually the case. If it's not a fellow, I say it must be a very high level person. I will tell you one example I remember very well, that a person was being nominated. They'd been doing statistics in business and economics and in finance. And one of the letters came from a person at a very large bank that was on the executive committee, or maybe might have even been a member of the board of directors of that, who wrote a very compelling letter about how they used this statistician's work and forecasts, and it had a tremendous impact on their investment decisions, et cetera, even to the point where when the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, this very high-ranking member of the board said basically that they averted billions of dollars of disaster by following this statistician's advice about certain economic models and investing models, et cetera. Okay, that person's not an ASA fellow, but when some member of the board of directors of a large bank says something like that, I think it's very impactful. I guess Ilya is trying to hurry me along, but I do want to make a very important point here. Is too many rather than just enough. I always have solicited more letters from people, and I select the best. I think the limit now is 3 letters for a nomination. So even if I've got a 4th or a 5th letter, I would use excerpts from those letters in the supporting statements. And if someone said they can't write a letter because they already were doing 2 nominations or whatever, I would say, can you send me a brief email statement, maybe just 2 to 5 sentences about this individual that I could use in the right part of the supporting statements. So I might even send an email note out and say, hey, Dr. A was a co-chair of this, Biopharmaceutical Section session conference. Can you write me a couple letters about or a couple sentences about their contribution? So I would reach out to many of their connections and not even ask for a full letter, but just an email statement that I could use the excerpt that says, Dr. A was extremely organized and influential in setting the theme of the conference and breaking down sessions, et cetera, et cetera. So things along those lines, I think, can be woven in and getting input from other people. So it's not all about letter writers. You got to have good letter writers, but getting input from others and embedding a key sentence or 2 in the supporting statements, I think, is very useful. Next slide. All right, so, use your statistical expertise to develop a balanced and complete block design. You've highlighted the strengths of this candidate, which are labeled A, B, C, D here. You have letter writers. Maybe you've requested letters from as many as 5 people. And I think Christy mentioned this as well as some others. You want to make sure the letters don't all say the same thing. You want to make sure there's complementary kind of reinforcing messages about the individual's contributions and their strengths across all of these categories. Next slide. Another important thing about letter writing for me that I found very useful is to tell the letter writers exactly what you want. Be very specific and give them instructions. Next. So I would always say, here's your first paragraph. When you write your letter, introduce yourself and how you know the candidate so that you bring credibility right away to anybody reading this letter that I, as the letter writer or this letter writer, knows the candidate well. Next, please. Then paragraphs 2 through 4, I'd say, I want you to address the candidate's strengths. Of course, the ones that you've mapped out back in step 3. So I would say, I want you to highlight their contributions to Bayesian inference or their contributions to, the ASA section on XYZ, the biopharm section or whatever it might be, right? And I'd be very explicit and say, please tell me the person's influence, their impact, their drive, their willingness to reach out and broaden, the horizons of the, organization or the work that they were doing, et cetera. So I'd give that very explicit guidance. And then in paragraph 5, I'd say, finalize your letter with maybe a couple qualities about the candidate that don't necessarily, there's no place for them to be in the nomination, like the person's a great team player or a strong leader or open-minded, et cetera. Good sense of humor and easy to work with, okay? And then at the end, I'd say finish with a very, next click, please. Finish with a strong, I tell them, explicit statement, this person is very deserving, of ASA Fellowship. So finish strong. So that's how I would send a letter to the letter writers telling them, here's how I want you to write the letter. And I want it to be this very systematic, organized, and impactful letter. Next slide. In the supporting statements, you've heard a lot about these. I'm much more of a fan, and I think you've heard this mentioned, about more on less. So whatever section you're writing for, pick one or two outstanding examples and describe them in detail. Emphasize the influence, the innovation, what was above and beyond the call of duty. And if there's a whole bunch of examples that you would like to highlight, I still say pick the one or two and give the details. And then what I routinely did was I would have a small sentence or a few sentences or a small paragraph at the end of that saying that, this nominee has had similar accomplishments on this drug or in this therapeutic area or in this phase of development, et cetera, so that you could get across a really deep and profound example for that individual, but also say there's many more that I could highlight in these different areas, okay? I think it's worthwhile to have something in each section, but don't overdo it or exaggerate it. Even if it's just a small paragraph, I think having something in every section shows that the nominee has made contributions kind of broadly across all of these different areas. But again, you shouldn't, don't make stuff up or overdo it or exaggerate it. If the person has had just a little bit of, contributions outside the ASA to the statistics profession, well, just say those and don't exaggerate it, but let them know that, yes, this person has also been involved in the DIA or PSI or the Biometric Society or something else, okay? And then last step, well, keep your fingers crossed. You've put together a stellar package for a stellar candidate. Be optimistic, but temper expectations with your candidate. And lastly, next click. When the final decision comes, celebrate, all right? Acknowledge the candidate. I always hosted a breakfast meeting at the JSM. Whenever I had a candidate that was elected, I would get the letter writers and others who contributed, myself and the nominee, and I would organize a breakfast to recognize the contributions of everybody there and to thank them for doing that. If it's unsuccessful, then you can have a thoughtful plan about when to resubmit. Again, not with the notion of you're going to keep submitting every year, but sometimes a submission the next year is warranted. Sometimes you might say, okay, let's wait another couple years to, as Christy said, run that longer distance or climb that mountain a little bit higher before we resubmit again. Okay, that's it for my part of the presentation. And I'll turn it back to Ilya, I believe, for Q&A.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you everyone thank you all the speakers. Now we'll have 3 questions, so I'll just go through. There is one question: will the slides will be shared? Yeah, I don't think anybody would. I hope speakers would not mind sharing that. Second question: how about NIH study section for service? Is it a major or minor contribution for a fellow nomination? I don't know who can try to answer that.
Hi, Ilya, this is Ivan. Maybe I could answer that. I have served on this NIH sessions before. And I believe it really contributes to the sort of service to the broader statistical profession. And so if you have those kind of experience, make sure you highlight those in the last session that talk about the general contribution to the broader statistical profession.
No, thank you. Anybody wants to add anything?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Steve Ruberg here. I'll just say, yeah, I think that kind of stuff is very valuable. And again, the higher the level, the broader, the more prestigious the organization. The the more valuable it is to say that these people, or that this is a valuable contribution. So it could be, service to some medical, the Alzheimer's Association or playing some role in that. So those things count. I think they count notably to show that the person is actively engaged in the broader scientific community. And that's a real value for the ASA and the statistical community.
Thank you. And the last question is maybe has already been partially covered, but okay, there is no limit. There is a limit to the number of supporting letters that can be part of the nomination package, but beyond those letters, other colleagues of the nominee may have worthwhile information or a story to contribute. Can the speakers recommend how to incorporate this extra information into the nomination package? And I think Steve already mentioned that, but maybe you can just reinforce that, or other people can add something.
Yeah, so I did mention that briefly, that I would solicit more letters, and the letters that I didn't use in the nomination package, I would pull excerpts out of them. And I would send, like I said, emails if I knew that my nominee had been a co-editor of a special issue of this journal. I might have sent an email to the other co-editor and say, can you give me some statements to say how well this person did on this task? And many times people would just send back a brief paragraph, or sometimes something even longer. And I would just try to find the sentences in there that would indicate how the person was influential, impactful, organized, showed leadership, whatever the case might be. So yeah, I definitely solicited input from others that could speak directly maybe about a particular smaller issue that didn't maybe necessarily get to the level of a letter of support or a full supporting statement, but was valuable, a valuable tidbit to say there's somebody else out there in the world, not just me as a nominator, who also recognizes this person's contributions and skills.
Thank you. Okay, there's couple of more questions, but then we'll turn to panel because and then go back to questions after that. So one question is somewhat interesting in a way that obviously not a prerequisite for nomination. We have an idea of the average age or years in profession that fellows are typically nominated at. So I don't know what the optimal age, but who wants to comment on that?
I think this is Christy. Generally speaking, we saw a lot of the nominees coming through in their mid-40s, but that doesn't mean that there are some really, really fast-track rising star. I have also seen people becoming fellow in their late 30s. So it's really a function of their contributions, their impact.
Yeah, I think over the last few years, when I reviewed some of these nomination package, in general, what I found, the nomination from industry, more specifically, you would look at maybe they have been in industry after their PhD degrees, maybe anywhere between maybe 15 to 20 years. And I did not look at their age, but it's just judging from the experience level, then you could figure out sort of is what Christy is saying, is probably around 40 would be a good estimate.
Yeah, this is Paul. That's a very interesting question, and obviously, we've seen a very broad range spanned. I had a similar sense that a lot of top technical academics, by the time they get to their 40s, they've proven their value, right? That's when they will have had very influential papers. The real stars might be a little earlier than that. I think consistent with what Ivan said, I think my guess is that the average age of people in industry who become fellows is going to be a little bit older than academics, but I don't have, never looked into it. I'm just sort of thinking that that's probably the case. And I always kind of, frankly, we all bring our own personal views to the process, but I always like the idea when somebody with a very long record in the industry was still very active. You know, somebody who maybe was still influencing junior colleagues 40 years into the field. That always sort of impressed me, and I might have been thinking that the person gets some cumulative credit for a very long career, but that's just me, and it's an individual thing for committee members.
Thank you. So let me switch to our panelists and panel question. Then we go back to some of the other questions. So I would like to introduce our panelists. Brenda Crowe, been in pharmaceutical industry since 1997 on technical leadership roles, and at Lilly, where I also was privileged to work with her, like with Steve Ruberg. ASA Fellow from 2017, ASA Biopharmaceutical Section Fellows Committee member. Alex Dmitrienko is my friend and also former colleague, actually twice in 2 different companies. Been in pharma industry since 1998 and on various technical roles, and he became ASA Fellow in 2009. Bill Pikounis is non-clinical statistician since 1991, was ASA Fellow 2014, and is also current ASA Biopharmaceutical Fellows Committee member. Currently head of manufacturing and applied statistics in Johnson & Johnson. Lanju Zhang is from pharma industry since 2005, technical administrative leadership roles, ASA Fellow from 2019. Kelly Hong Jo, been in the pharma industry since 2008 in various areas like statistics, real world evidence, medical analytics, and inside roles and leadership. ASA Fellow from 2002, and she really volunteered in many, many different committees. Some of their names I even don't quite recognize, but it's very impressive. And with this, I will also, I'll make first a short introduction, which would be important only for members of biopharmaceutical group. And what we decided to do is to form a panel or subcommittee of maybe up to 10 distinguished people who nominated many other people before. And therefore, we would like to ask them to review dossiers of people who were submitting their letters, the nomination this year. And for that, this is only for members of Biopharmaceutical Committee Biopharmaceutical Section. But please, other people, other sections may copy that. And if anybody is interested in experts giving a quick review of their dossier, please send it to me. Then we will have several panel questions. Let me, it seems that the copy of the slides that
Ilya, I'm not seeing your slides.
Yeah, I stopped sharing because I think I opened accidentally different copy. Maybe I don't know what happened. But okay, so let me use this version then. Sorry about that. So first we start with questions for nominees. So how do I know if I am ready? And how do I find a nominator? So I think there already been enough said about that, but maybe somebody from panel or the speakers want to comment on that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. How do I know I'm ready? I think there's several things you can do is just look at the people who've been elected ASA Fellow, particularly from the Biopharm section, and just kind of get a sense of where do you fit in with them in terms of years of experience and contributions and leadership kind of roles that you've had, et cetera. I think you can ask, perhaps you know some others who are ASA Fellows, and you can ask them, do you think I'm ready? How comparable is my career and accomplishments to when you were elected ASA Fellow? I think you can talk. I think you can talk to other ASA Fellows who've done that, or just other senior people in your organization who may be willing to give you some insights as to whether they think your contributions are big enough, broad enough, sustained enough, et cetera, to be ready for ASA Fellow. So you can do some of your own introspection by comparing to those who have been elected, as well as talking directly with those who've been elected to see where they were in their career when they were elected. So that's at least the answer to the first part of the question.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Hello. Yes, this is. Oh, go ahead.
So hi, this is Kelly. I have some thoughts. You know, first of all, if you go to the ASA website, you'll be able to get a list of all fellows and the years they became fellows. And then if you also, you know, read some of these announcements, and also particularly during the JSM, they're being sort of recognized. And then you go to Biopharm sections, you know, reception, business meeting. You know, I went there every year during the JSM. And then you kind of, you know, meet and run into people. And if you volunteer, you get a chance to work with them. So not only having that two-way conversations, but also really get inspired by them. Then think on your own, what kind of work you have done. If you look at also nomination packages and samples, you get a chance to assess yourself with your potential nominator, you know, what areas you might be having the strength, and go through the list as the speakers have already described. So it's a process, and it's a little bit sort of dare to try, but I would say don't be afraid, but at the same time, if you're not ready, just think, what should I do next year or so?
Thank you. Now, a related question is that I put in a new version, which I somehow lost, but it's related to this group of questions to nominate. How to identify letter writers for my nomination package? And is it recommended to invite at least one letter written from academia as opposed to industry or government? When is the best time to contact the letter writers? Is it helpful to create an outline of topics to be covered in each letter? Steve actually covered that with his one of these 5 steps is actually giving precise instructions to letter writers how to structure it. Maybe somebody can look at it from the nominee perspective. So how would I find writer for my letter?
Ilya, this is Alex Dmitrienko, and hi everybody as well. I just wanted to very quickly say a few words that share a few comments would be related mostly to the first question, but they would touch upon the second question as well. As the former chair of the Fellows Committee within the Biopharmaceutical Section, I would like to do a plug for this committee. It is, by the way, currently chaired by Ilya, who is organizes a webinar. And this committee has been around for a long time, I think close to 15 years now. And its primary job is exactly work with members who are interested in finding out more about the nomination process, and we would be more than happy to help answer those kinds of questions. And I realized that not everybody on this webinar is a member of the biopharmaceutical section, so I hope that similar committees or maybe less formal groups exist within other sections as well. So I will again do this shameless plug, and then I would like to hear others comment on this question as well.
Thank you, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
This is Bill. I'd like to speak a little bit maybe of finding a nominator. I think Steve, among many of his great points, was it should be someone you know very well already, someone you've worked literally years with, either in a professional capacity or a work capacity and so on. You don't want to call someone who maybe you met or maybe you collaborated on a paper with, or maybe was served on one committee at some point. It really should be a nominator that that knows your work very, very well, and you can work, as Christy pointed out and others, very, very closely. You will have a very few couple of months or 3 months or so putting together this package, and constant communication with your nominator will be absolutely crucial for a successful submission.
Thank you, Bill. Any other comments?
I think there was a question about timing of letter writers, or when do you find these people, who do you ask, etc.
Yeah.
And I will just say, I started if I was going to nominate somebody, let's say in 2021, at the JSM in 2020, I know it's a bad example because it was virtual, but literally the year before is when I would go around and start talking to people and say, hey, would you be willing to write a letter for somebody? So Christy said plan very early. I was always working a year in advance, because it's not long after people go to JSM and the new fellows are announced that the next round of people are starting to think about, okay, maybe I ought to be nominated for fellow, or maybe I ought to nominate someone. So because you're only allowed to be involved in 2 of them, and there's some, high profile people who you tend to get asked to do this stuff a lot, you should ask early as a year in advance, to get them kind of locked in and committed that, yes, I will support your nomination, because they may get asked by 2 or 3 or 4 other people. And as long as you get them locked in, then, that's a good thing. So a year in advance, plan early.
Yes, thanks, Steve. So maybe I'll move to some other questions, which I think broadly were covered by many speakers. For example, the importance of both career achievements and professional services. I think Ivan talked to that, and maybe a little bit reinforce this relative relative contributions of this two elements. Does anybody want to share any experience from maybe some cases that were?
Ilya, I'm sorry, it's Alex again. Do you mind if I say a few words about the previous bullet point?
Yes.
About assembling compelling comprehensive nomination package. I know that several people have already touched upon this, and I could completely relate to the points they said. I know Ivan and Christy said about the importance of personal stories, and Paul pointed out that we should avoid dry tone, and the nomination package should not look like a job description. And I felt that this is something that is very similar to my own personal experiences. As the chair of the Fellows Committee, I've had a chance to review a good number of different packages, and I always felt, that somehow quite a few nomination packages tend to be quite dry, and they just end up being as a long list of accomplishment. And as much as we appreciate somebody else's accomplishments, as you're going through a long list of accomplishments, it can get boring pretty quickly. And as a result, you feel that this nomination package does not really do the nominee enough justice. And it always reminds me of the ancient art of storytelling, because I've seen a few nomination packages where there were quite a few very, very effective storytelling devices employed. It's really not that difficult. You begin with a problem and you discuss the challenge, you describe how you played a very important key role, leading role in solving it and addressing it, you describe your actions, and then it's very important to also describe the impact. And it's often this last part that's kind of overlooked because, for example, looking at this from my perspective, and I've been working in the pharmaceutical industry for a long time, when I see that somebody says that they led a very important phase 3 development program, I can relate to that. But there are so many people out there who've been working in academia, maybe different industry in the government, who do not necessarily relate to this kind of, they realize it's something that's important, but it needs to be very clearly stated that what the actual impact was. Perhaps it was important medical need that was met, that you introduced certain innovation that helped bring a very important new treatment to the market, and how many patients were potentially benefited from that. So it is important to summarize, to kind of tell an exciting story that the members of the Fellows Committee would relate to. I think this is something that we should generally put a bit more emphasis on.
Oh, thank you, Alex. So basically we covered 2 clusters of questions for nominee and for nominator, how to assemble a package. And now maybe the last one is.
Hey, Ilya, this is Steve. I'm gonna compliment Alex's excellent remarks. But even going maybe a little bit beyond that by saying, there's lots of statisticians who've been involved in some sort of phase 3 development program, and the result was the approval of a product, right? What I also found useful and very helpful, if it is indeed the case, but that's the kind of people I would always try to nominate, is to say, oh, and by the way, this approach that this individual took is now being copied by other teams in the company. Or this person along the way developed a novel way of doing Bayesian network meta-analysis, and that's become a routine kind of thing within the company. So it's not just that you did your job on this drug and marched it all the way through to submission and approval, and maybe even successful marketing, but your influence spread out, or you broke new ground in ways that other teams, other therapeutic areas or whatever took notice and adopted similar approaches. So I think what Alex described as a situation, task, action, and results, to really play out the results is an important thing, because I've seen a lot of times where this person's worked hard, they led this team, they did this work on this committee, but I never really know, did that work turn into anything meaningful or impactful for the company, society, the profession, whatever.
Yes, thank you, Steve. Any other comments on that?
I just want to make a comment that in the company, a lot of times there are metrics being measured, and of course some are proprietary, but you can think about these similar approaches, that how do you measure the impact that you have based on your work. So for example, what I did, in terms of some of the publications or presentations, I went to Google Scholars just to see the citation and who and how many people looked at that, and then what were some of the feedback, having some conference presentations. And then also, Biopharm section has some poster contests that my colleagues and I won some poster contests. I think, the work that you do, you might think, if someone is, reviewing it from a different sector, such as the academia or government, how would they understand what you do that makes a difference to patients, for example?
Yes, thank you. Kelly, so...
can I just build briefly on what Kelly and Steve just said? One of the challenges that we have sometimes is to what extent does the statistician get credit for being involved in a successful project, right? That a lot of the packages will say, okay, this statistician was on this trial and they brought a life-saving drug to thousands of people. And it's like, okay, it's good if they were involved in an important project, but if that could be supported with the kind of things that Kelly and Steve mentioned, and say, hey, there was really a novel approach in the design that this person proposed that was a real contribution. Or here was an analysis that added to the medical community's understanding that was novel, or this approach was being copied within the company, outside of the company, published, being picked up by other people. And that kind of really shows that the person made a real contribution and just didn't happen to be assigned to a project where the treatment was going to be effective regardless.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I don't have direct comments on this particular topic. And I do have a couple of comments before we close. And Ilya, I know the time is getting pretty close. And for people who are thinking about to be nominated in the near future, it's important to develop relationships and build bridges. And those bridges and relationships come in really handy, both for our professional life, because they enrich our professional lives. They also become our allies at a time like the fellow nomination. So it's something very important to keep in mind. Not like people in academia where someone might keep very close relationship with the advisor, and then the thesis advisors. Then the advisors look after the individual and eventually nominate the individual. So we don't have those sorts of established built-in relationship for industry folks. So it's up to us to build relationships, to build bridges across different sectors of employment.
Yes, thank you. Maybe the last minute before we close, we can talk about advantages of being an ASA Fellow, which is a natural question. Okay, why ASA Fellow? Of course, it's a great honor, but maybe somebody can just quickly speak on that.
Steve Ruberg here. You'll get more opportunities to work for the ASA as a volunteer on committees and other activities of the ASA. But of course, that in itself, I think, is also enriching and rewarding, as Christy said, building bridges and relationships and getting to know the rest of the ASA organization and its activities, I think carries some rewards in and of itself. So I say it with a bit of humor, but with a lot of sincerity as well, as those opportunities. I think there's more opportunities for you to contribute.
Yes, and actually only after I became ASA Fellow, I started working more on different committees and trying to give back. I guess I have some kind of feeling that I didn't accomplish enough before. This webinar is part of that. And on this optimistic note, I think we can close this webinar. There are some couple of questions we got, we didn't have time to discuss. We promise that if we know people who answer that, we can respond to them. Or maybe we can set up some place where we can respond to anonymous questions. I'll talk to Rick about that. So thank you very much again, all speakers and panelists for this great discussion. I hope it will be useful. And again, as a Biopharmaceutical Section chair, we'll be setting up the review panel that would allow members of Biopharmaceutical Section to get their dossiers reviewed by experts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care then, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. I'll be closing down the webinar. Everyone have a wonderful day. Goodbye now.